The iron bar scraped across the door frame as Nora Mitchell slid it into place at dawn, sealing herself inside the weathered cabin that sat on the edge of Guthrie, Oklahoma, where the prairie stretched endlessly in every direction, and danger rode with the wind. It was 1891, and the territory was still wild enough that a woman alone had every reason to fear what might come knocking, though most folks in town whispered that Nora's precautions went beyond sensible caution into something closer to madness. She had lived this way for 3 years now, ever since the fever took her father and left her with nothing but 40 acres of stubborn land, and a fear that had burrowed so deep into her bones that daylight offered no comfort. The first time Vincent Sawyer rode up to her property, he could see the cabin sitting squat and defiant against the horizon, smoke rising from the chimney even though it was nearly noon and warm for October. He had heard about the Mitchell place from the postmaster in town, who mentioned that a young woman lived out there alone and never came for her mail anymore, never came for anything at all. Vincent was new to Guthrie, having drifted down from Kansas with his horse, his saddle, and a reputation for being honest in his work, which was rare enough to be valuable. He had signed on with the Sullivan Ranch 10 miles north, but he liked to know the lay of the land around him, liked to know his neighbors even if they kept to themselves. He reined his bay gelding to a stop 50 feet from the cabin and called out in a voice that carried clear and strong. "Hello, the house. Name is Vincent Sawyer from the Sullivan Ranch north of here. Just riding through to introduce myself, mean no harm." The cabin sat silent and still, but he could feel eyes on him. He waited, patient as the prairie itself, his hands resting easy on his saddle horn where anyone watching could see them. After a long moment, a woman's voice came from inside, muffled by the thick wooden door but clear enough to understand. "I appreciate the introduction, Mr. Sawyer, but I am not receiving visitors. You can go on your way now." Her voice was younger than he expected, and there was something in it beyond fear, something like determination wrapped around exhaustion. Vincent nodded even though she could not see him clearly through whatever crack or window she was watching from. "Yes, madam. I understand. Just wanted you to know who I am in case you ever need anything. I will be working the Sullivan place, so I will be around these parts regular." He turned his horse and rode away without looking back, but the image of that barred door stayed with him. Something about it did not sit right, not because a woman alone should not take precautions, but because keeping a door barred in daylight spoke of something deeper than reasonable care. 3 days later, he rode past again on his way to check the southern fence line for Mr. Sullivan. This time he called out before he even got close. "Vincent Sawyer here again, Miss Mitchell. Just passing through on ranch business." He did not stop, just kept his horse moving at an easy walk, but he saw the curtain twitch in the single window that faced the road. It became a habit after that. Every time he had reason to ride anywhere near her property, he announced himself loud and clear, always using his full name, always making sure she knew it was him before he got too close. He never stopped unless he had specific reason to, never pressed for conversation, just let her know he was there and that he meant no harm. October bled into November, and the routine continued. Nora found herself listening for that voice. She hated that she did, hated that she had started to recognize the particular cadence of his announcement, the way he said his name like it was a promise of safety. She told herself it meant nothing, that he was probably just another drifter who would move on when winter came, but he kept showing up, kept announcing himself, kept being exactly what he said he was. The day everything changed started like any other. Nora woke before dawn, barred the door, and went about her morning routine in the dim interior of the cabin. She had supplies enough to last through winter if she was careful, and she had learned to be very careful. She was grinding corn for meal when she heard the sound that made her blood turn cold, a sound she had not heard in over a year but would never forget. Wolves. Not the distant howling that sometimes echoed across the prairie at night, but the closer, more purposeful sounds of a pack on the hunt. She moved to the window and peered through the gap in the curtains. The sun was just breaking the horizon, painting the prairie in shades of gold and amber, and there in that beautiful light she saw them, at least 6 wolves circling her small barn where she kept her 2 horses and handful of chickens. The horses were screaming, high panicked sounds that cut through the morning air, and Nora felt her heart hammering against her ribs. She had her father's rifle, kept it loaded and ready, but the barn was 30 feet from the cabin door. 30 feet of open ground. 30 feet where anything could happen. Her hands shook as she lifted the bar from the door, and she was just about to step outside when she heard it. Vincent Sawyer approaching. "I heard the commotion, Miss Mitchell." His voice rang out strong and clear, and then there was the crack of a rifle shot, then another. Nora yanked the door open in time to see Vincent on his horse, rifle to his shoulder, firing methodically at the wolves. The pack scattered, 2 of them falling still on the ground while the others fled back toward the open prairie. Her legs moved without her permission, carrying her across those 30 feet to the barn. The horses were wild-eyed but unharmed, pressed into the corner of their stall. The chickens were making a racket, but a quick count showed none missing. She stood there, breathing hard, her hands still shaking, and then Vincent was beside her, his horse breathing heavy from a hard run. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his eyes scanning her quickly, professionally, like he was checking an animal for injury. "No," she managed. "No, I am fine. The animals are fine. You got here just in time." He nodded, already moving toward the 2 dead wolves. "I was riding early, checking the north pasture. Heard your horses from a mile off." He paused, looking at her directly for the first time. "Good thing you had that door unbarred, or you might not have been able to help them in time." Nora felt something crack inside her chest, some wall she had built brick by careful brick. "I would not have," she admitted quietly. "I would have stood inside and listened to them die because I was too afraid to open the door." Vincent was quiet for a moment, then he knelt beside the wolves, examining them with the practical eye of someone who had lived his whole life on the land. "Fear is not a weakness, Miss Mitchell. Fear kept humanity alive long enough to build civilization. But sometimes we have to decide what we are more afraid of, the danger outside or the life we are missing by hiding from it." She wanted to be angry at him for the presumption of that statement, wanted to tell him he knew nothing about her or what she had been through. But the words would not come because he was right, and they both knew it. Instead, she said, "Thank you for coming, for helping." "That is what neighbors do," he replied simply. He stood, brushing dirt from his knees. "I will drag these off your property, then I need to get back to the Sullivan place. You sure you are all right?" "Yes," she said, and this time her voice was steadier. "Yes, I am sure." He tipped his hat to her and set about his work, and Nora walked slowly back to the cabin. But this time, when she reached the door, she did not bar it immediately. She left it standing open, just a few inches, and the morning light spilled across her floor like it was reclaiming territory long abandoned. The next time Vincent rode past, 2 days later, he called out as usual, but this time when he looked toward the cabin, the door was standing open. Not wide, but enough that he could see movement inside. He slowed his horse, uncertain, and then Nora appeared in the doorway, still inside the threshold but visible. "Mr. Sawyer," she called out, "would you like some coffee? I just made a fresh pot." He could have lied and said he did not have time. could have made it easy for her to retreat back into her fortress, but he recognized the courage it took for her to make that offer. So he said, "I would appreciate that, Miss Mitchell, thank you." He dismounted slowly, tied his horse to the post by the door, and waited until she stepped back before he approached. The cabin was small but clean, everything in its place with the particular order of someone who spent a lot of time alone. She poured coffee into 2 tin cups, her hands only shaking a little, and they sat at her small table by the window. "I realize I never properly thanked you," she said after a moment of silence, "for coming when you did, for being consistent about announcing yourself. It has helped, knowing there was someone out here who was predictable." "You do not owe me thanks for being decent," Vincent said, wrapping his hands around the warm cup, "but I will accept it anyway." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I heard in town that you lost your father to fever." "I am sorry for that. Losing family is hard." Nora nodded, staring into her coffee. "It was 3 years ago. The fever came through Guthrie that summer and took a lot of folks. My father and we ran a small operation here, just enough to get by. When he died, I thought I could keep doing it the same way, but then things started happening. Men would come by, making offers on the land that were barely offers at all, more like threats. Someone shot at my horses one night, though I never found out who. I started to feel like everyone who came to the door was a danger, and then I just stopped opening it altogether." "And now?" Vincent asked gently. "Now I am realizing that I have been so busy protecting myself from dying that I forgot about living," she said, and there were tears in her eyes, but she did not let them fall. "I am 22 years old, Mr. Sawyer, and I feel like I am 80. I am tired of being afraid." Vincent set down his cup and looked at her with clear blue eyes that held no pity, only understanding. "Then stop. Not all at once, maybe, but a little at a time. Keep the door open during the day. Come to town once a week. Let people remember you exist. I will ride by regular if it helps. Keep announcing myself so you know it is me." "Why would you do that?" she asked. "You do not even know me." "Maybe I would like to," he said simply, "if you are willing." Something shifted in the air between them, something fragile and new but also inevitable, like the first green shoots after a long winter. Nora took a shaky breath and nodded. "I think I would like that too." Over the following weeks, Vincent became a regular presence at the Mitchell place. He came by 3 or 4 times a week, always announcing himself from a distance, always giving her time to prepare herself for company. Sometimes he brought supplies from town that he said he had picked up anyway. Sometimes he just stopped for coffee and conversation. Slowly, carefully, Nora began to emerge from the shell she had built around herself. She learned that Vincent was 26, that he had grown up on a ranch in Kansas and lost both his parents to influenza when he was 19. He had been drifting since then, working different ranches, never staying anywhere too long because staying meant putting down roots and roots meant having something to lose. She learned that he was gentle with animals, patient with work, and had a quiet sense of humor that snuck up on her and made her laugh when she least expected it. He learned that before her father died, Nora had been training to be a teacher, that she loved reading and could recite poetry from memory, that she had a beautiful singing voice she never used anymore because singing reminded her of happier times. He learned that she was stronger than she gave herself credit for, that she had kept her land running alone for 3 years through sheer stubborn determination, and that beneath her fear was a spirit that had been bruised but not broken. December arrived with cold winds and the promise of snow. The door to Nora's cabin now stood open most days until evening, and she had started going to town once a week, though Vincent usually rode with her the first few times until she felt comfortable making the journey alone. People in Guthrie were surprised to see her, but most were kind, and the ones who were not learned to keep their distance when they saw Vincent Sawyer standing quietly at her shoulder. It was on a particularly cold day in mid-December, when things between them shifted from friendship into something deeper. Vincent had come by to help her reinforce the barn against the winter storms that were sure to come, and they worked together in comfortable silence, their breath making clouds in the freezing air. When they finished, Nora invited him inside for the coffee that had become their ritual, but this time she also had stew cooking, rich with venison and vegetables. "Stay for supper," she said, and it was not really a question. "It is too much for just me, and it is getting dark anyway." "You should not ride back in the cold on an empty stomach." Vincent agreed, and they sat together as the sun set outside, the cabin warm from the fire and the food and the simple comfort of companionship. After they ate, Nora brought out a book of poems and Vincent asked her to read to him. Her voice filled the small space, soft and melodic, and he found himself watching her face more than listening to the words, seeing the way her eyes came alive when she read, the way the lamplight caught in her dark hair. When she finished the poem and looked up, their eyes met and held. The air seemed to thicken, charged with something neither of them could name but both recognized. "Nora," Vincent said quietly, using her first name for the first time. "I need to tell you something, and if it is not welcome, I will go back to just being your neighbor and nothing more." Her heart was suddenly pounding. "What is it?" "I am falling in love with you," he said plainly. No flowery language or pretty speeches, just the truth laid bare. "I think I have been since the first time I heard your voice through that barred door." "I know it is too soon. I know you might not feel the same way, but I needed you to know. I will not press you for anything you are not ready to give, but I could not keep pretending what I feel is just friendship." Nora set the book down with trembling hands. For 3 years, she had shut herself away from everything, including the possibility of this, of someone looking at her like she mattered, like she was worth loving. The fear rose up immediately, all the reasons why this was dangerous, why letting someone close meant giving them the power to hurt her, to leave her, to die and leave her alone again. But then she thought about the past 2 months, about how Vincent had been patient and consistent and kind. She thought about how he announced himself every time he came, giving her control and safety and the choice to let him in or not. She thought about how she felt when she saw him riding up, that little leap of happiness that she had been trying to ignore. "I am afraid," she whispered. "I am so afraid, Vincent. Everyone I have ever loved has left me, one way or another. My mother died when I was born, my father died from fever, and I do not know if I can survive losing someone else." Vincent moved slowly, telegraphing his intentions, and reached across the table to take her hand. His palm was warm and calloused, rough from work but gentle in its touch. "I cannot promise I will never die, Nora. None of us can promise that. But I can promise that while I am here, I will love you the best way I know how. I will announce myself every time I come. I will give you space when you need it. I will be patient when the fear gets too big. And I will never, ever make you feel like you have to bar your door against me." Tears spilled down her cheeks then, hot and fast, and she did not try to stop them. "I think I am falling in love with you too," she said, her voice breaking. "I think I have been for a while, and it terrifies me." "Then we will be terrified together," Vincent said, and he smiled, small and genuine and full of hope. He stayed late that night, talking by the fire, still holding her hand across the table. When he finally left, he kissed her forehead gently, a promise of more to come when she was ready, and rode back to the Sullivan Ranch through the cold darkness with his heart fuller than it had been in years. Christmas came to Guthrie with a light dusting of snow and a festiveness that seemed to seep into every corner of the town. Nora allowed Vincent to escort her to the church social, and they walked together through the decorated streets, her arm linked through his. People stared, of course, because people always did, but Nora found that she cared less and less what they thought. Vincent was solid and steady beside her, a bulwark against her anxiety, and his presence made the world feel smaller and more manageable. At the social they danced, Vincent's hand at her waist, her palm resting on his shoulder, and Nora felt something unlock inside her chest that she had thought was sealed forever. She laughed, really laughed, for the first time in years, and the sound of it made Vincent pull her a little closer, made him look at her like she was the only person in the room. When he took her home that night, he kissed her properly for the first time, standing on her porch with the stars cold and bright above them. It was sweet and careful and full of restrained passion, and when they broke apart, Nora was breathless. "Stay," she whispered, then blushed. "I mean, not like that. I just mean it is late and cold, and I have an extra blanket, and you could sleep by the fire." Vincent smiled and cupped her face gently. "I will stay if you want me to, but I want to do this right, Nora. I want to court you properly. I want everyone to know that I love you and that my intentions are honorable. So yes, I will stay tonight by the fire, and I will stay as many nights as you ask. But when we finally come together the way I hope we eventually will, I want you to be my wife." Nora felt her heart swell until she thought it might burst. "Are you proposing, Vincent Sawyer?" "Not yet," he said with a grin. "When I propose, it will be proper with a ring and everything. This is just me stating my intentions so you know where my heart is headed." She kissed him again, deeper this time, and whispered against his lips, "Then you better start saving for a ring, Cowboy." Winter deepened, and their relationship deepened with it. Vincent spent more and more time at the Mitchell place, helping with repairs, keeping Nora company, building a life alongside her one day at a time. He met with Mr. Sullivan and arranged to buy a piece of land that bordered Nora's property, planning for a future that included her, that included them building something together. On Valentine's Day, 1892, Vincent rode up to the cabin in the afternoon and called out as he always did, "Vincent Sawyer coming up." But this time when Nora opened the door, he was standing there in his best clothes, holding a small velvet box, and his face was nervous in a way she had never seen before. "Nora Mitchell," he said, dropping to one knee right there in the cold dirt of her yard. "I love you more than I knew it was possible to love another person. You are brave and beautiful and stronger than any storm these plains could throw at us. I want to wake up every morning and announce myself to you. I want to keep that door open between us for the rest of our lives. Will you marry me?" She did not even let him finish opening the box. She flew down the porch steps and into his arms, nearly knocking him over, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes," she said, kissing his face, his jaw, his lips. "Yes, yes, yes." The ring was simple, a small diamond set in gold, and it fit her finger like it had been made for her. They stood there in the yard, holding each other, and Nora realized that the door to her cabin was standing wide open behind her, and she felt no fear at all. They were married in April, when the prairie was coming back to life, and wildflowers dotted the grass in splashes of color. It was a small ceremony in the Guthrie church, attended by the ranch hands from the Sullivan place, some of the townspeople who had known Nora's father, and a few friends they had made together over the winter. Nora wore a simple white dress that she had sewn herself, and Vincent wore his best suit, and when they said their vows, there was not a dry eye in the church. They combined their properties and built a new house that sat between her original cabin and his new land. a house with big windows and a door that was always open during the day. Vincent continued working for Mr. Sullivan while also building up their own herd of cattle, and Nora started taking in students, teaching children from the surrounding ranches in the front room of their home. The first year of marriage was an adjustment, learning to live together, learning each other's rhythms and habits and moods. There were moments when Nora's old fears would resurface, when something would trigger that instinct to bar the door and shut out the world. But Vincent was patient, and he had learned to recognize the signs. He would announce himself even when he was just coming in from the barn, giving her that sense of control and safety, reminding her that he was predictable, that he was steady, that he was not going anywhere. In the fall of 1892, Nora realized she was pregnant. She was terrified at first, all her old fears about loss and death rising up to choke her, but Vincent held her through the panic attacks and reminded her that they were in this together. He rode into town and brought back every book on childbirth and infant care he could find. He talked to the other ranch wives, learning what to expect, how to help, what to prepare. Their son was born in May of 1893, a healthy baby with Vincent's blue eyes and Nora's dark hair. They named him Thomas, after Nora's father, and the day Vincent first held his son, Nora saw tears streaming down his face, saw the fierce, protective love that transformed him into something both tender and terrifying. Motherhood changed Nora in ways she had not anticipated. She had thought it would make her more afraid, more protective, more likely to want to bar the doors and hide from the world. But instead, it made her braver. She wanted Thomas to grow up knowing that the world could be dangerous but also beautiful, that fear was natural but should not be a prison. She wanted him to see his mother as someone who faced her demons and won. They fell into a rhythm as a family. Vincent would ride out early to work the cattle or check the fences, but he always came home for lunch, always announced himself as he rode up so Nora could hear him from wherever she was in the house. She would meet him at the door with Thomas in her arms, and Vincent would kiss them both, and the simple domesticity of it filled them with a contentment neither had expected to find. The years rolled by, measured in seasons and milestones. Thomas took his first steps in the front yard, chasing chickens and laughing. They added a daughter in 1895, a Spitfire they named Clara, who had Nora's determination and Vincent's steady calm. The ranch prospered, growing from a small operation into something respectable. Nora's teaching expanded, and she became known throughout the area as someone patient and skilled with children. But it was not always easy. There were droughts that tested their resources and their faith. There were cattle thieves who had to be driven off. There was the year that Clara got scarlet fever, and they spent 3 days and nights taking turns sitting by her bedside, praying and cooling her burning skin with wet cloths, until the fever finally broke and she opened her eyes and asked for water in a thin, scratchy voice. Through it all, Vincent kept his promise. Every single time he came to the house, whether he had been gone for 5 minutes or 5 hours, he announced himself. Vincent Sawyer coming home. He would call, and Nora would smile every single time, remembering that scared woman who kept her door barred even in daylight, remembering how this man had patiently, consistently, lovingly taught her that the world was not always something to fear. On their 10th wedding anniversary, they sat together on the porch of their house, watching the sun set over the prairie while Thomas and Clara played in the yard. Vincent's arm was around Nora's shoulders, and she was leaning into his warmth, and everything felt exactly right. "Do you ever think about that first day I rode up here?" Vincent asked quietly. "When you would not even open the door," Nora laughed softly. "I think about it all the time. I think about how terrified I was, how small my world had become." And then I think about you, riding past over and over, announcing yourself, never giving up on the possibility that I might eventually open that door." "I am glad you did," Vincent said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Best decision I ever made being persistent." "Best decision I ever made was being brave enough to invite you in for coffee," Nora replied. She turned to look at him, her eyes full of love. "You saved me, Vincent. Not from the wolves, though you did that too. You saved me from myself, from the fear that was eating me alive." Vincent shook his head gently. "No, sweetheart, you saved yourself. I just made sure you knew you did not have to do it alone." He paused, watching their children play, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. "Besides, you saved me too. I was drifting before I met you, never putting down roots because I was afraid of having something to lose. You taught me that love is worth the risk." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from gold to pink to purple. Thomas ran up the porch steps, grass-stained and grinning, with Clara right behind him. "Papa, tell us the story," Thomas demanded, throwing himself into Vincent's lap with the casual confidence of a child who has never known anything but love. "What story?" Vincent asked, though he knew exactly which one they meant. "The wolf story," Clara chimed in, climbing up beside her mother. "When you saved Mama from the wolves." Vincent and Nora exchanged an amused glance. They had told this story countless times, and it had grown in the telling, becoming family legend. "All right," Vincent said, settling both children more comfortably. "But then it is bedtime, no arguments." As he launched into the familiar tale, embellishing the danger just enough to make the children gasp, Nora let her gaze drift to the door of their home. It stood wide open, lamplight spilling out into the gathering dusk, welcoming and warm. The old cabin where she had lived in fear was still standing on the far edge of their property, but they used it for storage now, and Nora rarely thought about those dark years. When she did think about them, it was usually with gratitude, strange as that seemed. If she had not been so broken, she might not have recognized Vincent's particular brand of patient strength when it appeared. If she had not needed saving, she might not have let herself fall so completely and thoroughly in love with the man who had saved her, not with grand gestures but with consistency, with respect, with the simple act of announcing himself every time he came. Later that night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Nora and Vincent lay together in their bed, her head on his chest, his hand stroking her hair in the darkness. "I love you," she whispered, "in case I do not say it enough." "You say it plenty," Vincent replied, his voice rough with emotion, "but I never get tired of hearing it. I love you too, Nora. Today, tomorrow, and every day after that." She tilted her head up and kissed him, slow and sweet, a kiss that held 10 years of history and the promise of all the years still to come. They made love quietly, tenderly, their bodies familiar now but no less thrilling for that familiarity, and afterward they held each other close and drifted toward sleep. Just before Nora slipped under, she heard Vincent's breathing deepen and slow, and she felt that old flutter of anxiety, that fear of loss that probably would never completely leave her. But it was manageable now, a small thing compared to the vast ocean of love and safety that surrounded her. The years continued to pass, bringing new challenges and new joys. Thomas grew into a serious young man who loved the land as much as his father did. Clara developed a passion for teaching like her mother and began helping with the younger students. Vincent's hair started to gray at the temples, and Nora found she loved him even more with the silver threading through the dark gold. In 1903, when Thomas was 10 and Clara was 8, Nora discovered she was pregnant again, much to everyone's surprise. This pregnancy was harder than the first two, and there were moments when both she and Vincent were afraid of what might happen. But in February of 1904, she delivered a healthy baby girl they named Grace, and holding that tiny squirming life in her arms, Nora felt something complete inside her, some final piece of healing clicking into place. Grace was a happy baby who rarely cried, and her older siblings doted on her with fierce devotion. Vincent, who had been protective with the first two, became almost comically careful with this late-in-life surprise, as if he could not quite believe his luck in having 3 healthy children and a wife who still looked at him like he hung the moon. The ranch continued to prosper. They added more land, more cattle, hired a few hands to help with the work. Vincent became known throughout the territory as a fair employer and an honest dealer, and Nora's teaching became something of an institution, with former students going on to colleges back east and writing letters about their successes. But despite all their growth and success, some things never changed. Every single time Vincent came to the house, whether he had been gone for hours or just stepped out to the barn, he announced himself. Vincent Sawyer coming in, or Vincent Sawyer home. The words became as natural as breathing, a constant in their lives, a reminder of where they had started and how far they had come. The children, as they grew older, asked about it sometimes. Why did Papa always announce himself? Other fathers did not do that. Vincent and Nora would exchange a look, and then one of them would explain, in terms appropriate to the children's ages, about how sometimes people need extra reassurance, about how showing respect and giving someone control over their own space was a powerful form of love. Thomas, at 15, once said, "So you do it because Mama used to be afraid." He said it with the blunt curiosity of adolescence, not meaning any harm. Vincent had looked at his son seriously. "I do it because your mother deserves to feel safe and in control of her own home. I do it because it is a small thing that means a large thing. And I do it because I love her, and love is shown in the daily actions, not just the big gestures. You remember that when you find someone to love." Thomas had nodded, taking the lesson to heart, and Nora had felt her eyes sting with tears at the way Vincent was raising their son to be respectful and thoughtful. In 1908, when Nora was 39 and Vincent was 43, they took their family on a trip to Kansas City, the farthest any of them had traveled from Guthrie. It was an adventure, staying in a hotel, seeing the city with its electric lights and streetcars. The children were amazed, and even Nora found herself charmed by the bustle and energy. But on the third night, lying in the unfamiliar hotel bed, Nora found herself tense and anxious. The sounds of the city were wrong, too many people too close, and she could not stop thinking about all the things that could go wrong. Vincent felt her tension and pulled her close. "Want to go home?" he asked quietly. "Is that terrible?" she replied. "We came all this way." "Nothing terrible about knowing what you need," Vincent said. "We have seen the city, the kids have had an adventure, and now we know that home is where we belong. We can leave in the morning." They did leave the next morning, and as they got closer to Guthrie, Nora felt the tension leaving her shoulders. When their house finally came into view, sitting solid and welcoming on the prairie she knew so well, she felt tears of relief and joy. This was where she belonged, where they all belonged, in this place they had built together. The teenage years brought their own challenges. Thomas fell in love with the daughter of a neighboring rancher and suffered his first heartbreak when she chose someone else. Clara developed a stubborn streak that led to frequent clashes with her mother, though underneath it all was a deep love and respect. Grace grew from a sweet baby into a thoughtful child who loved reading and music, and seemed to understand people with an intuition beyond her years. Through it all, Vincent and Nora remained each other's anchor. They still sat on the porch most evenings, still held hands across the dinner table, still kissed goodnight like they meant it. Their love had evolved from that first desperate, fragile thing into something tested and proven, strong enough to weather any storm. In 1912, tragedy struck when Mr. Sullivan, who had been like a father to Vincent, passed away suddenly from a heart attack. Vincent was devastated, and for the first time in their marriage, Nora saw him truly broken. She held him while he cried, let him process his grief in his own way, and gently reminded him of all the things he had taught her about loss and fear and carrying on anyway. They attended the funeral together, Vincent in his black suit, Nora at his side in a dark dress, their children solemn behind them. At the graveside, Vincent gave a short eulogy about the man who had given him a chance when he was new to Oklahoma, who had become a friend and mentor. His voice only broke once, and when it did, Nora squeezed his hand, giving him the strength to continue. That night, when they were home and the children were in bed, Vincent sat by the fire and stared into the flames. Nora sat beside him, not speaking, just present. Finally, Vincent said quietly, I am so afraid of losing you, of the kids losing one of us. Today made it all feel so real, how temporary this all is. Nora took his hand, threading her fingers through his. I know, she said. I live with that fear every day, have for most of my life. But you taught me something important, Vincent. You taught me that love is worth the fear, that we cannot hide from life just because we are afraid of death. We have built something beautiful here, something that will last beyond us through our children and their children. That has to be enough. Vincent pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. When did you get so wise? I had a good teacher, she replied, and felt him smile against her neck. Time marched forward as it always does. Thomas married the youngest daughter of the postmaster in 1913, a sweet girl named Annabelle who fit into the family like she had always been there. They built a house on the western edge of the property and started their own family. Clara, after years of helping her mother teach, announced her intention to go to the Oklahoma State Normal School and become a certified teacher. Vincent was nervous about her leaving, but Nora encouraged it, proud of her daughter's ambition. Grace, at 10 years old, showed an affinity for animals that reminded Nora of Vincent. She could gentle a fractious horse with patience and soft words, could diagnose what was wrong with a sick calf just by observation. Vincent started teaching her everything he knew about ranching, and it was clear that she would be the one to carry on the operation when the time came. In 1915, as the world beyond Oklahoma grew turbulent with war in Europe, the Sawyer family remained focused on their own small corner of peace. Nora was 46 now, her dark hair shot through with silver, and Vincent was 51, his face lined from years in the sun. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the young woman who had finally opened her door and the patient cowboy who had announced himself until she did. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, Vincent said, I have been thinking about something. What is that? Nora asked, her hand in his as always. I have been announcing myself for over 20 years now, he said slowly. And I realized I do not actually know if you still need me to. I do it out of habit because I love the ritual of it, but if you do not need it anymore, if it feels silly or unnecessary, you can tell me. Nora was quiet for a moment, thinking. It was true that she was not the terrified woman she had been when they met. She did not bar doors anymore, did not flinch at unexpected sounds, did not lie awake at night cataloging all the terrible things that might happen. But the truth was more complicated than that. I need it, she said finally. Not because I am still that afraid girl, though she is still a part of me. I need it because it reminds me every single day that you love me, that you see me, that after all these years you still think I am worth that small effort. Does that make sense?" Vincent raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. "Perfect sense," he said. "Then I will keep doing it until I die, and probably even after that if there is any way to do so from beyond." She laughed, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I love you, Vincent Sawyer." "I love you too, Nora Sawyer. Every single day." The war in Europe eventually pulled America in, and in 1917, Thomas enlisted despite his wife being pregnant with their second child. It was one of the hardest days of Vincent and Nora's life, watching their son ride away in his uniform, not knowing if they would ever see him again. They threw themselves into supporting the war effort, saving food, buying bonds, and praying every single night for Thomas's safe return. He did return in 1919, thinner and quieter but whole. He had seen things he would not talk about, had lost friends whose names he recited sometimes in his sleep. But gradually, with the love of his family and the healing power of working the land, he found his way back to himself. His wife, Annabelle, gave birth to a daughter, and they named her Nora, and the elder Nora cried when she held her tiny namesake for the first time. Clara came home from school in 1920, certified and ready to start teaching. She took over Nora's school entirely, letting her mother finally retire after nearly 30 years of teaching local children. Nora found retirement harder than she expected, but Vincent gently pointed out that she had earned rest, that their grandchildren needed her attention, that he would quite like to have his wife to himself a bit more often. They traveled a little, never far but enough to see new things. They went to Tulsa, to Oklahoma City, once even back to Kansas where Vincent had grown up. But they always came home, to the house they had built, to the land they had tended, to the life they had made together. In 1925, they celebrated their 33rd wedding anniversary. All 3 of their children were there, along with 5 grandchildren and another on the way. They had a party on the lawn, tables loaded with food, children running everywhere, laughter filling the air. As Nora stood watching her family, this beautiful chaotic thing that she and Vincent had built, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Vincent found her, slipping his arm around her waist. "Happy?" he asked. "Incredibly," she replied. "Beyond what I ever thought possible." "Good," he said, kissing her temple. "That was always the plan." As the sun began to set on that anniversary celebration, Vincent climbed up on the porch and called for everyone's attention. The crowd quieted, faces turning toward him expectantly. "I just want to say a few words," Vincent began, his voice still strong despite his 59 years. 33 years ago, I married the bravest woman I have ever known. She was fighting battles nobody else could see, and she had every reason to keep her door barred against the world. But she chose to be brave instead. She chose to open that door and let me in, and that choice changed both our lives. He found Nora in the crowd, his eyes locked on hers. "You gave me a home, Nora. You gave me purpose and children and more love than any man deserves. You taught me that consistency and patience are forms of devotion. You taught me that the small gestures matter more than the grand ones. And every single day for 33 years, you have made me want to be better, to do better, to love better." There was not a dry eye watching as he stepped down from the porch and walked to her, taking her hands in his. "I know I announce myself every time I come home, and people probably think it is strange, but I want everyone here to know why I do it. I do it because I love this woman enough to show her in every small way I can that she is safe with me, that she is seen by me, that she is treasured by me. And I will keep doing it for as long as I draw breath." Nora was crying openly now, happy tears streaming down her face. "You foolish man," she said, laughing through the tears. "You are going to make everyone cry." "That is all right," Vincent replied, pulling her close. "Happy tears are the best kind." They danced together as the sun set and the stars came out, swaying to music played on someone's fiddle, surrounded by their children and grandchildren and the friends they had made over 3 decades of life in Guthrie. And when the party finally ended and the house was quiet again, they lay in their bed together, holding hands in the darkness like they always had. "Thank you," Nora whispered. "For what?" "For being patient, for announcing yourself, for loving me when I did not know how to love myself, for giving me this life." Vincent squeezed her hand. "Thank you for opening the door." They fell asleep like that, hands intertwined, hearts beating in rhythm, two people who had found each other in the wild Oklahoma prairie and built something lasting from patience, consistency, and love. The years that followed were gentler ones. Vincent and Nora settled into the rhythms of aging together, their days measured in small pleasures. Morning coffee on the porch, afternoon naps in the summer heat, evenings watching their grandchildren play in the same yard where their own children had played. The ranch was run mostly by Thomas now, with Grace's help, and Vincent took on more of an advisory role, though he still rode out most days to check fences and move cattle. Clara married in 1927, a fellow teacher from Oklahoma City, and they settled nearby. Nora loved watching her prickly daughter soften with love, seeing Clara become the kind of wife and mother Nora had always hoped for her. Grace, surprising everyone, fell in love with a veterinarian who opened a practice in Guthrie. They married in 1928, and Grace continued working the ranch while her husband tended to animals throughout the territory. Together, they were a formidable team, and Nora and Vincent knew the land would be in good hands long after they were gone. In 1930, as the Depression began to grip the nation, the Sawyer family weathered the storm better than most. They had always lived carefully, saving more than they spent, and the ranch provided food even when money was tight. They shared what they had with neighbors who were struggling, and Nora went back to teaching briefly, offering free lessons to children whose families could no longer afford school. It was during this time that Vincent's health began to fail. Nothing dramatic at first, just a shortness of breath that would not go away, a fatigue that sleeping did not fix. The doctor in Guthrie diagnosed a weak heart and told them gently that Vincent needed to slow down, take things easy, rest more. Vincent hated it. He had always been a man of action, and being told to sit still while others did the work felt like dying by inches. But Nora was firm, enlisting the children to keep their father from overdoing it, making sure he rested in the afternoons, limiting his time in the saddle. "I am not an invalid," Vincent grumbled one day, frustrated by the restrictions. "No, you are a stubborn man with a weak heart who I intend to keep alive as long as possible," Nora replied tartly. "So you will rest and you will like it." He glared at her for a moment, then his expression softened. "Yes, madam," he said meekly, and she had to hide her smile. Even with his health failing, Vincent never stopped announcing himself. If he went out to the barn and came back, he would call out, "Vincent Sawyer coming in." If he walked to the garden and returned, he would announce himself from the porch. It had been such a part of their lives for nearly 40 years that he could not have stopped if he wanted to, and Nora treasured every single announcement, hearing in it all the years of love and devotion. In the spring of 1932, they celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary. It was a quieter affair than their 33rd, just the immediate family, but no less meaningful. They renewed their vows in the same church where they had married, Vincent's voice trembling but strong as he promised once again to love and cherish Nora for as long as he lived. That night, Lying in bed, Nora said quietly, "I have been thinking about something." "What is that?" Vincent asked, his breathing slightly labored even at rest. "I have been afraid for most of my life," she said. "Afraid of loss, afraid of pain, afraid of being alone. And now I am facing the thing I have feared most, and I realize that all those years of fear did not prepare me at all. I am not ready to lose you, Vincent. I do not think I ever will be." Vincent turned his head to look at her, his blue eyes still clear and full of love even as his body weakened. "I am not ready to leave you either," he admitted. "But when that day comes, and it will come for one of us eventually, I want you to remember something. Remember that being afraid did not stop you from loving me. Remember that you chose bravery every single day, even when it was hard. And remember that love does not end just because life does." Nora was crying, but she nodded. "I will remember." "Good," he said, reaching for her hand. "Now come here and let me hold you while I still can." She curled against his side, careful of his frail body, and they lay together listening to each other breathe, savoring the time they had left. Vincent Sawyer died on a clear October morning in 1933, sitting on the porch of the house he had built with his wife, watching the sunrise over the prairie he had loved. Nora was beside him, as she had been for 41 years, holding his hand. His last words were, "I love you," and his last breath was easy, and Nora knew with certainty that he had lived a good life and had no regrets. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people, testament to the life Vincent had lived and the respect he had earned. Nora stood straight and dry-eyed through the service, through the burial in the Guthrie Cemetery, through the endless stream of condolences. It was not until she was home again, standing in the doorway of their house, that she finally broke. Thomas found her there, silent tears streaming down her face, staring at the empty porch where Vincent had always sat. "Mama," he said gently, putting his arm around her shoulders, "come inside." "He always announced himself," Nora whispered. "For 41 years, every single time he came to this house, he announced himself. I do not know how to live in a world where I will never hear that again." Thomas held her while she cried, and Clara and Grace came and surrounded her with their love, and the grandchildren, some old enough to understand and some too young, provided distraction and comfort in equal measure. They stayed with her for days, making sure she was never alone, helping her navigate this new reality. But eventually they had to go back to their own lives, and Nora had to learn to live alone again. It was terrible and painful and nothing like the loneliness she had felt before Vincent. That earlier solitude had been about fear. This was about loss, and loss was so much harder to bear. She thought about barring the door again, about retreating back into that protective isolation. But then she remembered what Vincent had said about love not ending just because life does, and she knew he would not want her to waste the years she had left by hiding from the world he had worked so hard to help her embrace. So she kept the door open. She kept teaching when people asked. She spent time with her children and grandchildren. She sat on the porch every evening and talked to Vincent like he was still there, telling him about her day, about the family, about the ranch. And sometimes, when the wind was just right and the prairie grass whispered in that particular way, she could almost hear his voice calling out, "Vincent Sawyer coming home." Nora Mitchell Sawyer lived for another 15 years, dying peacefully in her sleep in 1948 at the age of 79. In those years, she saw her family continue to grow and prosper, saw grandchildren marry and great-grandchildren be born, saw the ranch survive the Depression and the war and emerge stronger. She never remarried, never even considered it, because in her heart she was still married to the cowboy who had announced himself every single time he came. They buried her next to Vincent in the Guthrie Cemetery, Under a shared headstone that read, Vincent and Nora Sawyer, he announced himself. She opened the door. Together they built a life. Their children stood together at the graveside, along with grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all of them testament to the love story that had started with a barred door and a patient voice calling out, Vincent Sawyer here. And if you visit that old ranch outside Guthrie, Oklahoma today, now run by the great-great-grandchildren of Vincent and Nora, you might notice something curious. Every single member of that family, when they come home, announces themselves before they enter. It is a tradition passed down through generations, a reminder that love is shown in consistency, in respect, in the small daily gestures that say, I see you, I value you, you are safe with me. It is a tradition born from fear transformed into courage, from isolation transformed into connection, from a barred door that finally opened to let love in.